Thanks for coming this evening. My name is Kim Quirk. Started Energy Emporium in 2009, and our goal is to help people reduce or eliminate their fossil fuels. So mainly renewable energy systems and PV and solar hot water and batteries and off-grid and all of those kinds of things. And now we do heat pumps and whatever we can do to help you reduce your fossil fuels. Yeah, is there a half-dim sort of situation? Easier to see the slides.
the lights?
Over there.
Oh, Mary did, okay.
I don't know how to turn, that's the fan.
Yeah, we might be able to light up.
It's the one
that
furthest.
wall.
Yeah.
How's that?
It's pretty dark. How's everybody feel about that? You can see the
If they're
slides.
scared, I'll be.
If you're scared.
I will come in tomorrow.
I'm scared. Oh, man. Okay, so battery power.
Please sign in.
So I'd like to start by saying, why are we here? Why are we talking about batteries? And of course, we all know that fossil fuels are coming to an end, and we do have to have alternatives, yay. And so what are our biggest, our renewable resources, wind and solar and hydro all create electricity. We don't need combustion engines and such to use that electricity. And of course, one of the problems is they aren't completely reliable. The sun goes away every day, and the wind doesn't blow every day, etc. So we are starting to talk about, and you're reading about, the electrification of everything. So we have our typical household appliances, as we always have, and to that we can change our hot water into electric or heat pump electric, our heating, and of course vehicles, and so pretty soon everything can be electric. Also, the proliferation of solar was distributed, as well as large solar fields and wind, are giving us, are bringing up a new problem to resolve, and that is when those renewable resources aren't available, we've got to have stored versions of them, or batteries, basically. So that's why we're talking about batteries. Up until recently, those of us who have had solar PV systems tied to the grid understand that we're using our utility, our electric grid, as a storage mechanism. Net metering, where you produce extra solar energy and it is fed to the grid, and then you get it back later from the grid, is just like a big battery, which is nice. But the utilities and also the grid itself can't handle all of the disappearance of the renewables and the unreliability of them. So that's one of the reasons that we're, again, talking about storage. And storage at all levels, at our residential level all the way up to the utility level. So one of the biggest problems, of course, for homeowners and small businesses, if the grid goes down and you have a nice solar array, you don't have any electricity. The array goes down with it. Secondly, and this just happened in New Hampshire, and in Vermont's gone through some new net metering rules. Well, every time the net metering rules change, it's going to change the finances of how that works with the solar system. So in New Hampshire, the net metering rules just changed so that every kilowatt hour that we give to the utility, they're not going to give us a full kilowatt hour back. And so the question is, can batteries help us to regain what we lost there if it's not retail one-to-one? And then number 3, on-grid applications. And on-grid applications have a lot to do with billing and how when we use the electricity versus how much it costs at that time. And today, the New Hampshire and I believe the Vermont utilities are not charging generally the residential, for residential people, aren't charging for time of use, or they might be for some, but time of use or other tiered billing structures. We'll talk about them a little bit, but can batteries help with that? And of course the answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Okay, so some of the benefits. Backup applications. So that's the first thing that we just talked about. If the grid goes down, we can use batteries to back up various circuits in the house, or even potentially the whole house, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a backup load and a backup set of loads and a whole house, backing up a whole house, some of the energy required to do that. The second one I'm calling a general category of on-grid applications, and this would be a combination of batteries and grid connection. And of course, the last one is off-grid applications. So I'll go into a little more detail about, especially the first two, off-grid applications where we're using batteries and probably solar or renewables to feed the whole house. We won't spend too much time on that. But the on-grid applications have to do with when the net metering rules change, the TOU, time of use, self-consumption, peak demand, and limited export. So first, just a little bit about battery backup. Most people in New England today would have purchased a generator, oil or propane or something, to do their backup. And often I would even say we've been sold the largest generator because the difference between a 5 kW generator and a 12 kW generator just hasn't been that much money. You don't think about how much fuel you're going to use between the two different generators. So often you've been told, just buy a whole house generator and forget about it. So today, and even today, with the price of batteries today, to do the same backup as your 12 kW generator with a set of batteries is still very expensive. As the battery technology changes, and that's part of what we're talking about today, that price differential is going to become much more important to think about how much fuel are you going to use, and the other piece of that, longer outages, and having to have that generator run for a much longer period of time. Now the cost of operating that generator will start making a bigger difference as the cost of the fuel goes up versus batteries, and cost of batteries going down. And then, of course, if you use solar to recharge those batteries, the fuel is free. So we aren't at generator parity right now. Batteries and generators, they don't cost the same to install, but soon they probably will. Okay, so a little bit more about these on-grid applications, matching batteries and the grid. As I said, the New Hampshire net metering rules just changed so that 1 kilowatt hour export no longer equals, that's what that little thing is, / it does not equal 1 kilowatt hour imported. So in the middle of the day, your solar is generating extra energy and your house doesn't need it. It goes back to the grid, and in the past, and with sort of true net metering one-to-one, 1 kilowatt hour sent to the grid. Later on, up to 12 months later, you could get a full kilowatt hour back. And when that's no longer the case, then you want to save your kilowatt hours for yourself. And so you could save the extra kilowatt hours in the day in your own battery bank and use them as soon as the sun goes down, use them first, and they are worth more money to you than the kilowatt hour you'll get back from the grid. In today's New Hampshire net metering, it's about 3.5 cents less than a full retail price. So if we're paying 17 cents a kilowatt hour to Liberty or whatever to buy a kilowatt hour, then the one we give to them is only worth 12.5 cents. Did I do that right? 3.5 cents less. Yes.
Do you know what the approximately, just for a modest house, what the payback time would take to pay the battery off?
Okay, so let's get to finances and stuff just a little bit later. So the question is, what's going to be the payback when you start adding batteries? And it's really important because today, and let's even say yesterday, batteries are so expensive that it is very long-term to pay that back. And so as they become less expensive, we'll get a lot closer to saying, oh, now it's a 10-year payback or something. We aren't there yet. The second one, time of use or tiered billing. So this is when the utility charges you one rate if you use the electricity between 9 and 5 p.m. and if you use it between 5 and 8 p.m. at night, or 9 a.m. in the morning, or whatever. So different times of the day. And it's important, a lot of utilities are going to go to this. So even if your utility is not charging you more for different times or for different amounts. The tiered billing means you use the first 300 kilowatt hours in a month, and it costs you this many cents per kilowatt hour, and the second 300 kilowatt hours costs you more or less, whatever way it works. So that's a tiered billing. Anything that's related to the time of use or the tiered billing. The reason our utilities are going to probably all get to a more sophisticated billing is because it costs them a lot more to buy the energy that the electrons, the energy that they're giving you at certain times of day, at certain times of the day, and by quantities. So, for instance, the peak demand in this area is usually, like the highest peak demand that the utilities have to meet is a summertime day, middle afternoon, 2 to 4 p.m., when, and it doesn't seem like that's the peak for our homes, but for all the businesses, that's where the air conditioning might be going hard and people's machinery and everything else. And that's a peak that they have to meet. So if you also want in your house to do your laundry at 2 p.m., it should cost, in a utility's perspective, it should cost you more. And especially if later on at 8 p.m., if you were to do your laundry then, and the cost of electricity is much less, then you should get that reduced cost. So it can be very good for all of us to have a time of use or tiered billing.
But it's the same thing?
No, they aren't. So time of use is what time of the day are you using the energy.
Yeah.
Tiered billing is how much energy are you using, and if you go above that amount, do you pay more, or maybe you get a discount because they know you'll always use that much. I haven't looked at too many tiered billings. If somebody has one, I think typically you pay a lot for the first 500 kilowatt hours, and then you pay a little less or something for additional. Could be the opposite, though, if anybody knows. Yeah, sometimes it's the opposite. So, but it means that there's different rates depending on what you're doing. So peak demand goes to what I was just saying, that there's a general peak of all the systems out there. Like the utilities have to think about the peak that they have to address that has everybody's homes as well as all the businesses involved. And again, that one usually is mid-afternoon in the summer with air conditioning and machinery running. And most residents don't have to pay for a peak demand, but a small business or a business that has a lot of energy use, usually motors and various high load equipment, they may have on their bill something that says, okay, this month you reached at one period, and the period will be a 10-minute period or something, you reached 30 kilowatts. All your equipment was on and it was 30 kilowatts or something. And they will have to pay a price, which is dollars, many dollars, 10, 12, maybe even $20 per kilowatt for that 30 kilowatt peak that they hit for 10 minutes sometime during the month. So residential billing generally does not include this peak demand, or the peak billing, but often small businesses do. Batteries, again, we're talking about how batteries can help with each of these things. So actually, I should go back a little bit. So in time of use or tiered billing, if you're making your solar in the day, when the sun's shining, and you put it into your batteries, and then the batteries allow you to feed back to supply your house later on. That gives you an opportunity to shift your usage in your house. So you have two ways. Let's think about that washing machine again. If you don't have solar and you don't have batteries, but you're being charged between 2 and 5 p.m., you're being charged more. You can shift your load use. You can decide to do your laundry after 5 p.m. and it costs you less. And if you have solar and some batteries, then all the extra solar that you've collected into the battery bank can be used. The battery bank can supply your energy at 4 p.m. when you want to do your laundry. You have to do your laundry, and it's more than the sun is shining now, but your batteries have sunshine from earlier in the morning. So it will just add to that peak. There's lots of ways that you can, I call it like shifting the energy. You got the sun only when it was shining, but you put it in your battery. So you could use it at night, or you could use it during the expensive time of the day. That's the time of use. It will help with your tiered billing because it just takes off the total amount of energy that you've used. With peak demand, you could have it, the batteries providing energy whenever your load, your house, goes over a certain amount of wattage. So they're a little bit detailed, but we can go into, none of these are on the typical residential bill, but they could be. And so part of what we're talking about is batteries are useful for these situations, and we may see these billing models in the future. Limited grid sell, or not being able to sell to the grid at all, has occurred in a couple of states. And so it's something we also want to think about. In Hawaii, they have so much solar power that you're not allowed to sell to the grid anymore. And it kind of goes with the last one, self-consumption. You want to use your own solar panels and your own batteries to meet all of your own house needs, so you don't have any extra. And so a smart set of controls with a battery and solar panels can help you do that. And then, of course, off-grid applications, like I had said earlier, in an off-grid situation, your batteries are your main source of energy for the house. And so in those cases, the battery technologies, again, we're talking about batteries and their technologies. There's an awful lot of good technologies that are great for when you're living off grid. You're cycling your batteries every single day, usually like to a deep discharge. You're running your whole house, and then the sun comes out, and and you're running your whole house. So it's cycles. The kinds of things that batteries are manufactured or designed for can be for a high power out. So now we're talking about that peak demand. You want to be able to push a whole lot of power out of the batteries into the load, the big loads that are out there. Or it could be for multiple cycles. And if you live off grid, you want to be able to use the batteries every single day and have them recharge every single day. And some of the other ones, the time of use, those might just be little discharges of the battery, and they don't always go deep discharge. They don't cycle as much. So all these different things that we want to meet will have different requirements for the battery banks. Okay, with that, now I want to go into what are some of the popular batteries today. Everybody's heard about the Tesla Powerwall, so we'll start with that one. The Tesla Powerwall 1 is no longer being manufactured, so I won't talk about that one unless you want to ask me questions about it later. But the Powerwall 2, the AC version, is being sold in the US, and that is a battery plus inverter. It provides 5 kilowatts continuous. That's what the inverter provides, and it has 13.5 kilowatt hours of battery storage. To get an idea, and it can scale up to 10. That doesn't make sense. Sorry, forget that scale up to 10 thing.
You can, I think,
Scale that one up.
partner 10 Teslas together.
Oh, up to 10. Yes, that's exactly what it means. I'm like, why does it say up to 10? It didn't mean 10 kilowatt hours. It meant you can scale up to 10 Tesla Powerwall 2s. So that would be 10 times 13.5 kilowatt hours. So give you an idea of 13.5 kilowatt hours. That is probably enough to run all of your regular appliances in a house. Not heating, probably not hot water, no mini splits. The things that require heating and hot water are huge energy loads. And so 10 to 15 kilowatt hours is kind of a typical 2,500 square foot house with all, and I'm looking around and I know that some of you are not typical. If you live off grid, you probably use the equivalent of 4 or 5 kilowatt hours a day, and that's half of this or a quarter of this or something. But people who live on grid and they have all their regular TVs, microwaves, refrigerators, washing machines, that kind of stuff, 13.5 is really meant to help supply those appliances for a couple of days. Again, not heating. Probably not heating. Okay, now this, yes, go ahead.
I'm confused, the 5 kilowatt versus the 13.5 kilowatt.
Okay, good point. So one thing to recognize, there's a tiny little difference between those, kilowatt, and the other one is kilowatt hours. And so the inverter can provide 5 kilowatts. That's an instantaneous power output. If you have your refrigerators turned on and your washing machine is going at the same time and you turn on the microwave, you may be getting close to that 5,000 watts or 5 kilowatts at that moment that they're all on. That's a power out. When you put that little H next to it, kilowatt hours, now we're talking about an energy. So one's a power, one's an energy. And an energy is over time. So if you look at your electric bill, you're going to see 200, you're going to have used 550 kilowatt hours through that whole month. And so when you're looking at your electric bill, what you're paying are kilowatt hours. That's an energy uses. And that power, 5 kilowatts, is that peak, is that power instantaneous. And we talk about a peak demand or a peak power, that's generally what we're talking about. So the inverter can supply as much as 5,000. It's not a lot, by the way. 5,000 watts is not a lot. As I said, when we talk about generators, and you bought a 12 kilowatt generator or a 20 kilowatt generator to run your house, that's a power number, and a lot of people's houses actually need that 12 kilowatts at one time to run some of their things. If you have air conditioning, some other things that require a lot of power, air conditioning, pool pumps, or pool heaters especially, again, anything that heats, electrically heats, and even the heat pumps, they still require quite a bit of energy. Okay, so the Tesla is, as I said, it's a combination, battery plus inverter. And so because it's a combination, it can do all three of the major things we talked about. It can do standalone, I say standalone backup, which means you don't have to have any solar PV at all. You can install one of these Tesla Powerwalls, and let's say your grid goes down, for as long as there is some juice in that battery, which could be a couple of days if you don't turn on any heating stuff or air conditioning, you will have backup. And then as soon as the power comes back up, one of the things it does is refill those batteries. So it's not using solar at all. So that's a standalone backup kind of battery. It can also do a grid tie backup. And to do a grid tie backup, it is actually sending a signal to your grid tie. So now you have solar and you're tied to the grid, but when the grid goes down, this new inverter inside the Tesla picks up and says, okay, I'm going to use my battery to power usually a backup load, set of loads, not your whole house. Usually it's a set of loads, the important ones, refrigerator, kitchen, certain, maybe your communications, your Comcast or whatever. So that's a grid tie, and it can send signal. This is the important thing. So it can send signals to your grid tie system and your solar array, so that if that is an extended outage and the batteries, and the sun comes out, then your solar panels can be used to recharge those batteries. So it's what we're looking for if you put solar on your roof and then you realize later the grid goes down, my solar goes down, what good is it? This will let those solar panels charge this battery and keep you going for an extended outage.
Ignore the grid. Just goes by itself.
It ignores the grid. It actually forms a grid. We call it a grid forming inverter or a microgrid. And so yes, but it does have to completely disconnect from the grid because when it's powering your backup loads, that it can't be sending power back to the grid at the same time. So there is a transfer switch, is something that makes sure it's completely disconnected from the grid. And then thirdly, this Tesla solution can do these on-grid applications. Like I was saying, the key to the on-grid applications is really that there's a computer in there, and that computer can say, okay, time of use, you want me to use the battery at 3 in the afternoon if you demand a power of more than 3 kilowatts. And you can program those kinds of things in. Or you want me to use the batteries first every time when the sun goes down and the house is still turning on lights and using power. First use up my batteries and then finally buy from the grid if you have to. So those are the on-grid applications. And again, this battery solution can do it. It's lithium ion. I think you'll see most of the, I think every battery I'm talking about now is a lithium based. It's either lithium ion or lithium ion or lithium iron phosphate. And we're not going to go into the details of that, right? What the difference is. Sonnen Battery is sort of the next most popular one. It's been around even longer than Tesla and has some real experience. There's basically three types, and those three pictures are really small, medium, and large, and that has to do with how much battery storage that they provide. This, too, is a solution that is a battery plus inverter, and it does come in two power output sizes of 4 kilowatts, which is small, and it's that one in the middle, and 8 kilowatts, which is more like what you need to power a lot of the appliances in your house, not including heat. I'll say that a lot. Okay, and this one comes in 2 kilowatt hour increments from 4 kilowatt hours is the smallest, and that fits in the little box. So the little box is a 4 kilowatt hour storage, which is, about half of an 8 and only a third of a 12. So it's probably really your basic, let's say you want your furnace pumps or your water pumps or something like that to keep the heat going, and you want your refrigerator or something. We're talking a few devices for a shorter period of time, maybe 2 days. But the 16 kilowatt hour end gives you quite a bit more and quite a bit more time. It too, the Sonnen Battery, like the Tesla, can do the standalone backup, doesn't even have to have any solar. It can do grid tie backup, which means it can talk to your existing grid tie inverter, tell it to turn on or off. And the reason it has to talk to it is because if the batteries are full, it needs to tell your grid tie inverter to turn off the electricity coming from the solar panels, and that solar is just lost. It doesn't hurt anything. It just stops coming to the batteries. So the batteries could overcharge and could blow up or something. So it's really important that that you can talk to that grid tie inverter and say, okay, batteries are full. And then of course the on-grid applications. And so again, I think Sonnen Battery probably has the most experience in this realm of being in a standalone backup that then later can talk. Basically, it can talk to the grid tie inverter. It's lithium ion. And the other thing you'll want to look at once, if you're investigating these, is probably what's the warranty. And I think with the Tesla, the warranty, it says 10 years, but it doesn't say what is happening in 10 years, whereas the Sonnen Battery says very specifically you will still have 70% capacity in 10 years. So it's something to ask a little bit more about with Tesla. I couldn't find that information. Okay, this one, LG Chem, these are batteries only, no inverters. And they make two basic models. And I found this really interesting. The 48-volt battery is meant to be a replacement for, and we didn't talk about this, but what the slide that I could have started with is lead-acid batteries. Lead-acid batteries are the ones that we've all seen or heard about, and they're the ones that every off-grid home has today, probably. And the lead, and those are generally, those battery banks are made at 12, 24, or 48 volt. And so LG Chem said, first we want a lithium-ion battery that can replace those lower voltage ones, and they work with lots of different inverters. Then they also made, secondly, a 400 volt. So the higher voltage battery banks are meant to work with, I would call them the newer technology inverters. And I'll get to that in the next slide, but just recognize LG Chem is trying to be the battery manufacturer for everyone in that lithium ion space. So with this battery and the correct grid forming inverter, or sometimes called an off-grid inverter, you can do standalone backup. Similarly, you can do grid tie backup with that higher voltage battery with certain special grid tie inverters. And I didn't put anything about the grid applications because that technology and the information, the smarts, is in the inverter. So you can buy an inverter that has those smarts and work with these batteries. Okay, I know I'm probably going to be going over, so I'm going to try to go fast. So NFAs is a microinverter company. They came out with microinverters that are put under each panel on your roof if you're doing solar. And so they wanted a storage solution as well. And so in their case, they have what they call an AC battery. They're small, well, relatively small, 1.2 kilowatt hours, not 10, not 4, whatever, 1.2. So you buy a couple of these. They're at 24 volts. It doesn't really matter to you. It's a plug-and-play kind of thing. It has its own little inverter in there. And one of the biggest difficulties is it's really only designed for on-grid applications. It doesn't, if the grid goes down, it doesn't give you power backup to certain loads. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Sonny Boy has a similar solution. It at 2,500 watts output, that's what its inverter, I shouldn't say it's a similar one. Okay, it's an inverter plus battery. It's kind of small, 2,500 watts. You can put multiple of them together and get higher power. Works with especially its own inverters, grid-tie Sonny Boy inverters, and also works with some high power, high voltage batteries. Oh, you have to buy the battery separately. So you'll see behind this little Sonny Boy storage thing is an LG Chem battery. So you buy the parts a little bit separately is kind of how that one works.
Is that the only one it combines with?
You can, the only battery?
No, the LG. Is it the only one it combines with?
I think the Sonny Boy storage it was working with the Tesla Powerwall 1.
Okay.
But they discontinued that product. And Tesla made a Powerwall 2 that's a high voltage battery, but they're only selling that in Australia, and so maybe that'll come to the US at some point, but it isn't right now.
What's Green Mountain doing?
Green Mountain's Powerwall is a Powerwall 2 now. It was originally a Powerwall 1. And so we can, if somebody is Green Mountain specialist, we might be able to get more information on that.
I'll talk about that.
Okay, good. I thought you were going to get that. Okay, Joanna will talk about that. JLM Energy is a company that has made two very different solutions. The little one is a battery that fits under a solar panel, and you would put one under each solar panel. And this one has the same problem as the NFAs, which is it can only do the on-grid application. So that's the phaser. Small amount of battery storage under each module. It's interesting. I'm not so sure it's going to work well in New England because batteries often are very temperature sensitive, so not necessarily a great idea. Energizer 100 is a battery plus inverter, so this is very similar to the Sonnen and the Tesla. It has a 4.4 kW, so it's a smaller output inverter. Pretty good amount, 8.8 kilowatt hours of storage. So it can do all three, standalone backup, grid-tied backup, and on-grid applications. SolarEdge. Okay, so now we're talking, there's two products that combine as much of the smarts as they can, sort of all in one package. So SolarEdge from SolarEdge has a single inverter solution, is a single inverter solution. So what I mean by that is all these other ones, you already had your grid tie system and your solar panels, and then you added a Sonnen Battery with its own little inverter in there. So it's a two inverter solution. SolarEdge is a single inverter solution. Does grid tie and backup. It's also 7.6 kW, which is a pretty good amount of power out. Now we're getting closer to like a real generator output. The batteries are not required for the grid tie. This is really important too because you can buy the SolarEdge and the solar panels, install all of that, later on add the battery. These two last solutions, SolarEdge and the next one, Pike, they both also use the high voltage batteries, so 400 volts. Now again, most of the batteries we've dealt with are 12, 24, 48, 400 volts. They're DC coupled at 400 volts. They can do all of these things, standalone backup, grid tie backup, on-grid applications. And just quickly, the Pike is the last one, and actually the Pike is one of the newest ones. It was designed from the beginning. The storage has one more component that's required, an auto transformer to make it work. The Pike energy system was designed from the beginning to be a single inverter solution for grid tie, battery backup, all these on-grid applications Applications, etc. And it works with a battery made by Panasonic, which is called this Harbor Flex. It also has both a single-phase residential and a three-phase commercial version, the 11.4 kW. So it's kind of the newest, but it's also, okay, I'll just run, I think this is my last slide. There are certainly lots of other technologies and lots of other manufacturers that are working on things. So you'll see some of the manufacturers are auto companies. Okay, we should probably move on. Or do you want questions, or should we move on?
Let's take some questions.
What I would suggest doing is that if there are questions for Kim, we'll wait till the end and have Bill go next, and then Joanna. And I'm wondering if the presenters would be able to provide their slides.
Yes.
If you leave your email
Yes.
and you want the slides, just shoot us an email and we'll send you it, okay? So the email for that we're using, well, contact me, mary.n.boyle, B as in Bravo, OYLE, @gmail.com. And so a lot of this information, you can refer to. I'd like to introduce Bill Bender from Solaflect, and I'll let him introduce his particular experience and all that about Solaflect. By the way, I want to thank you all for coming. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you need a slide advancer? Would it help?
I have one actually, yes.
Do you need the light stuff?
There we go.
Yes, good evening. My name's Bill Bender from Soleflect Energy. Could I ask how many people are from Cornish? Just I'm curious where people are from. From Plainfield? And other towns? Great.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate seeing this many people out and interested in batteries. Kim's given you all the really useful nitty-gritty stuff for your house and very practical. I'm sort of doing more of the big picture and sort of some of the vision kind of thing. And that's actually really important. Because it's amazing how often we hear as a solar company, well, solar's great, but what happens when the sun goes down and it doesn't really work? And so there is that belief out there, certainly circulating in certain kinds of communities, and we need people like you who are interested and come to these kinds of things to be visionaries and go out and help spread the word that the world is changing, despite what some people think. So we're a 10-year-old company, Soleflect Energy. This is what we do. They're the trackers. We do only ground mount. Get the on switch here.
Do you have your USB?
Do you need the
Yeah,
light?
no, I just need the on switch there. This is what we do as a ground-mounted tracker. We're a 10-year-old company. We spent 5 years R&D. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we've been selling these for 5 years. We started in Norwich, Vermont, very locally. That's where we're based. And we've been growing, expanding out from there. How much solar, do you have any idea what percentage of solar, how many households in Cornish are solar? Anybody know about
20.
what percent?
Let's see, how many? Oh, you're 8%.
Percent of households?
Not sure.
Well, one thing we're really proud of is that we think we've contributed a lot to. In Norwich, 1 in 6 households is solar.
One in six?
1 in 6. And we're 50% of that. Nationally, ground-mounted systems for residential is way under 1%. They're almost non-existent residentially. So not only have we gotten a lot of solar into Norwich, but we also are 50% in the town we started in of all solar. And there's no place in the country we know of that's come anywhere close to that. And we're 20-25% of all solar in some of our surrounding towns. So we've expanded out from there. We've gotten the Reader's Choice Award the last 2 years. But we don't do do rooftop, so if you want rooftop solar, go to Kim. She's the person for that. But we're now in Vermont, New Hampshire, and moving into Massachusetts. So we've taken our base and we've been expanding from there. So this is the price history of PV cells. These are the cells, not the actual cost of the modules, and certainly not the cost of putting it on your house, but the actual cells. And you can see it's a declined by a factor of 250. And PV is not a new technology. It's actually older than I am by a little bit, and not much. But it's a 250-fold price decline. Why I show this when we're talking about batteries is batteries are on the same kind of trajectory, but it's probably back in here somewhere. It's got a long ways to go. So the expectation is batteries are on a similar kind of trajectory. The costs have already come down dramatically. There was a point sometime in the last year or so that someone at a trade show was telling me that they'd come down 50% in 18 months. And the big driver here is electric vehicles, which is really pushing just economies of scale and everything else. So the battery value proposition, and mostly I have not overlapped, but a teensy bit with what Kim says. So right now it's about 15 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's almost as much to store energy in the battery as it is to buy electricity. So it's pretty expensive right now. We try to do, our business is really designed around a financial sale. So we try to do our solar so that it's a financially really good deal. Right now, batteries don't quite get into that category yet, but some of that is for policy reasons, which I'll talk about. Yeah. But as the prices come down, it's going to change really radically over the next few years. So what are some of the things is Kim did a really nice job. There's grid backup. There are a lot of financial reasons. Again, this depends a lot on the utility you're in, the state you're in. But there's some, like Kim was saying, zero export, like Hawaii, where you're just not allowed to export into the grid. So we get to see, you talk to any battery company, and again, mostly at trade shows for me personally, you talk to the battery company, like, where are your installations? They always say Hawaii. Hawaii is on the order of 50% solar in Kauai, in the island of Kauai. So very high penetration of solar, a big percentage of the actual energy used in Vermont and New Hampshire. We're on the order of 1%, or even less, I think, way under in New Hampshire, is the amount of energy we use that comes from solar. So and then California is in a different place as well. So we get to look at a lot of places around the world about what's going to happen for us 5 or 10 years. We're way behind in terms of solar penetration. So those kinds of markets tell us sort of the future. So when you get to a certain point, the utilities start screaming and say, hey, wait, we don't want any of this. So zero export is what that's called. There's things like peak shaving, and this is sort of different names for exactly what Kim was talking about, or peak shifting. These are things batteries can do, and even arbitrage, which a lot of places is illegal, but in some places it's legal, where you can buy cheap electricity at night and put it in your battery and sell it back at more expensive than the day. And so this is a picture of just one of our trackers in terms of daily production in the month of June. And so this is what some of the naysayers will say, oh, what do you do? There's a cloudy day. We can't have solar. Well, yes, that's true in that particular spot. But we're seeing this already as we're getting more geographically dispersed. If we add up our production, we get a lot flatter curve. So if you look, I took this afternoon, so it was a little bit cloudy here, but you can see Maine was almost totally clear this afternoon. That's not very far away, and Pennsylvania was really sunny. We don't think much about it, that about half our power in this area comes from Hydro-Quebec. That's all really kind of up here. It's 200 to 700 miles away. So most of our power actually comes from quite a long ways as it is, or from nuclear plants in Connecticut, for example. You take solar and you geographically average it over a bigger area, and you're gonna get rid of a lot of these kinds of fluctuations. So in your house you have this, but over a larger grid area, you don't. And then the other issue is looking seasonally. So this is again, it's a real graph of one of our trackers. You can see the issue we have here is November, December. So that is an issue. If you tried to be off-grid, those are going to be your challenging months here. Now, what I always find really interesting here is January, and you compare to November is actually farther away from the solstice than January is. So it's actually more sun hours in November on average than in January, but we always see a lot more power in January. It's because November, December not only are shorter days, but also are cloudier. So November is significantly cloudier than January. But so those are things that we have to think about storage for. If you look, the flip side, the good news story of that, though, is if you look at the 35 years of ISO New England data, so that's the New England grid, essentially, in 31 years, the peak it was in either July or August, and over the entire period, the peak was between June 11th and September 6th. So actually, the peak almost always happens in our peak production months for solar. So solar actually is really good for the grid peak overall in New England. The peak hours are 2 to 6 p.m. So this is again a tracker, one of our trackers in February. You see this is the power production during the day. So these are clouds going overhead, those dips, that's what it is. Otherwise, a sunny day. This is a 4 kilowatt tracker, so you actually see we're getting more than 4 kilowatts. The reason it's a cold, sunny day, PV does better the colder it is. You put PV on a house, on a roof in Phoenix, it gets really hot up there. The production is actually way below nameplate because the production goes down as a function of temperature. The reverse also happens. So they're basically rated at sort of room temperature. So when it gets really cold, they're actually more efficient. So we often see 10% extra power on really cold days. But the other thing here is that right after sunrise, we get up to full power very quickly. Within an hour to an hour and a half, we're at full power. And we're at full power almost all day long with a tracker, where a fixed solar is going to be almost exactly an upside down V like this. It's going to come up and go down. In the summer, this is going to start way over here, won't get quite as high because it's warmer, and it's going to come way over to here and come down late in the day. The thing in the summer is if you have a fixed south-facing solar panel, the sun actually rises in the northeast, so it doesn't actually get on the panel until about almost 2 hours after sunrise. And same as sun, it sets on the south-facing panels several hours before sunset. So with the tracker, which is always pointing at the sun, you don't have that, and you actually get power kind of all day long. Well, why did I bring that up? Well, if you're storing power, it makes a big difference both in your house and on the grid if you have a flatter power production all day long, and especially in the summer where that's really, it can be 14 hours, 15 hours of power, you're using much more of that solar and you don't have to store it. So this is a real kind of specific example of what's happened in California called the duck curve. Who's seen the duck curve before? A lot of people. So this is a typical spring day in California. So this is just from 12 a.m. to midnight. And so you have kind of what historically happened is you kind of peaks during the day, and then you have business use during the middle of the day, and then usually the peak is, like I said, in New England, it's 2 to 6 in the afternoon when some people start coming home, cooking, and turn on the washer, dryer, whatever, but businesses haven't all shut down yet, or the janitor's there and the lights are on, or whatever. There's some overlap between business use and residential use in the peak. Is later in the day, and in places like California where you have a lot of air conditioning demand on the high days, that's why late in the evening everyone comes home and flips on the air conditioner and you really hit a lot of power onto the grid. So this changes to what this is the graph back in 2012, 2013, and these graphs are the changes from solar. So California has lots of solar going in, and what the solar is doing is the solar is reducing the amount of demand on the larger grid. So this isn't consumption, this is the grid demand, sort of what's required from the big coal plants, natural gas plants, hydro, things like that. It's just because the residential solar or the solar in business locations is reducing the demand on the grid. So why is that important? Well, again, just like Hawaii for batteries in California, they tell us, they sort of predict our future because they're way ahead of us in terms of grid penetration. So the issue is you have a lot of this power demand here, and you have what's called a ramp. You have to turn on generators and produce a lot more power very quickly. And the big issue is if you get too much solar, then you have to worry if you're starting to put too much power into the grid. So batteries can start affecting some of these things and changing some of these things, the demand. We go back and look at our or think about our power curve. This is where the tracker is really nice. So the solar on the roof is doing this. You can see exactly that's the solar production curve there. The tracker would actually be producing really right about to the peak, and then would drop right there as well. But we would actually, at this peak, a tracker in California would still be producing power. So we'd be contributing to helping eliminate that problem a little bit.
Just push down.
Have to do it. The whole thing's locked up. Now what's going on? There we go. So this is the thing with batteries today is, I said it's expensive and it's kind of like solar. A lot of this depends upon what are the policies. Well, some of the policies is batteries, even today, and especially these new inverters, are some services that can help the grid are actually being built into the batteries and the inverters, except policy-wise, there's no way to be paid for these things. So utilities pay for a lot of services to keep the grid running. So some of the kinds of things that they might do is frequency regulation. So we think of 120 volts, 60 hertz, right? We kind of take that for granted. Well, you go to a lot of developing countries and it jumps all over the place. So the reason is utilities are required to keep it in this narrow range, and they can have to pay a lot of money to certain kinds of generators to provide services. So to keep the frequency at 60 hertz, there's a very small band, and they're required to keep it in that band. Same with voltage. If voltage drops too much, if you get to like 90 volts, you'd have a lot of problems. You'd cause a lot of damage. So the utility has to keep it within a small range of the set point. So those are things like frequency regulation, voltage support. So money transfers for that. Well, it turns out inverters, and especially connected to batteries, can provide some of these services. Even today, and certainly in the next year, 2, 3, these things are getting built in really fast right now. But there's no mechanism for for a homeowner to get paid for those services. So if you have that battery, you can be, and there's even a couple things that are being built in inverters, sort of being required in inverters that are basically, utilities are going to get free services from these things. So some of the reasons we say batteries are expensive is because there's no policy mechanism to actually pay for the services they can provide to the grid. So if we could get paid for some of those things, the economics would change. There's all sorts of kinds of services and arbitrage. These are the things that kind of Kim was talking about, backup power, demand charge reduction. These are things that, that batteries can do for like a homeowner, these are things that can do for the utility, these are things that can do in general for the grid. So one of the ways to make batteries more financially attractive is to change policy so that the services that they can provide, actually there's a way to get reimbursed for them. So the utilities keep complaining about, oh, solar is expensive or batteries are expensive, whatever. Well, yeah, but we also get all this free stuff from them that is actually has value. So Kim went through a lot of what's out there, and as she said, lead acid is historically what's been used, different kinds. There is some interesting technology going on, development there. They're not totally sitting on the sidelines. It remains to be seen who's going to win. You hear all about lithium-ion because the cars, they need to be light for cars. Lead acid don't need to be light if they just sit there. Home batteries don't. The problem with lead acid batteries in the past is you can't discharge them really past 50% without damaging them, and they don't cycle very long, so you have to replace them in 5 to 7 years. Well, there's some technologies that are coming out with using nanoparticles or whatever that are improving some of those kinds of characteristics, and so they're not totally dead out of the game. Lithium iron, of course, this is what Kim's been talking about. The other one, she was in one of her last slides, but I find really interesting, I'll talk about, is saltwater and then flow batteries. Kim talked about the Tesla battery. This is one that I find fascinating. It's the saltwater battery. It's the only battery that you can take a chainsaw, go right through this, spread it on the floor, and let your kid go play in it. There's nothing toxic in this. And it's not true with the other batteries. And they actually, was really sad to see that they went bankrupt like 6 months ago or something like that, but they've come out of bankruptcy now, and they're looking at coming back into the market in 2018. And it's really, the components that go into this are almost all really inexpensive. So, it's kind of exciting technology. It's priced in the same ballpark as other things, but if they get to scale, this should be a really inexpensive battery. There's not much of, it's kind of, it's very cool technology. These are things that Kim alluded to a little bit, the energy management systems. There's one I really like. It's been vaporware. I saw it a year ago. It was vaporware. I saw it just a month ago, and it's still vaporware, but it's supposed to come out next year. That's why I don't really have any more than the name, except what they're trying to develop is really cool, because it's essentially a lot like the systems that Kim was talking about, Sonnen or whatever. But what I like about it is it's really just a really nice kind of display panel where you can kind of prioritize your load. So if you did have a grid outage or something and you went to the backup power, there's essentially just like little sliders, kind of like on your iPhone or iPad or something, where you can say low, medium, or high. Like my bedroom is low, medium, or high, or my kitchen is low, medium, or high, or you can sort of say which loads you want to prioritize, and it's a really intuitive, easy interface. And then you can, it's really sunny today, so I can use a lot of stuff, and you can turn everything out. And you look at the weather, turn everything to high, and then you look at the weather report, and oh no, it's we're still in Texas or Florida or Puerto Rico, and we're not going to have power for a couple weeks, and it looks like it's going to be cloudy for a couple days. You can change the priority. Really, you just walk over and say, okay, let's not run these things right now. With the air conditioner and the hot tub, we're going to forgo right now. Okay. But the managing the demand is a huge part of over the next 30 years. Everything's we're going to manage when we use power and how we use it, and that's a lot of how we're going to control the grid. So back a little bit about us again, which is sort of a preface for the next thing I'm going to talk about, again, from the grid perspective. So like I said, we're 10 years old. We got $2 million Sunshot Awards from the U.S. Department of Energy. So the Sunshot Initiative was started in 2011 modeled after the moonshot. Anyone remember the moonshot? JFK, 1961, saying, okay, at the end of the decade, we're going to put a man on the moon. 1969, we went to the moon. So they said in 2011, at the end of the decade, we want solar to be cheaper than and other energy sources without any subsidies. And And so we got 2 awards there because of the structure that we designed. Who's seen one of our trackers out and about? Anybody? Yeah, we're getting quite a few out there. And so we took away 1,000 pounds of steel and replaced it with 7 pounds of cable. So that was what our idea was about. And their goal of their awards was, if we want to make things cheaper, we got to get rid of stuff, right? So here we were getting rid of 1,000 pounds of steel. So that's basically how we got the awards. But in the process, we got very plugged into this program and the other companies around the country that were getting these awards, so sort of leading edge technology. So that was really exciting in terms of the network we got to be part of and to see what else was going on. Being stubborn again. What is... It's just stuck. Yeah. It's just freezing up here. I don't know what's going on. Well, so I'll have to talk a little bit. And I apologize. I don't know what's happened here.
Can you exit and re-enter?
It's kind of just stuck.
There.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. So anyway, so this is how they defined it on the utility scale. Is back in when they started the program, it was like 380 a watt on the utility scale. This is a slide I used last year where we were at $1.64, and the 2020 goal was $1. So just as an illustration of how fast solar technology is changing, if none of you have noticed. So like I said, this was the 2015 number that I was using last year in 2016. It's official. We've reached it. Yeah. So this just came out in September. We've reached that goal on utility scale. So, and that's why it's really kind of funny watching the news about coal, right? So 3 more coal plants went out are shutting down as of today. So no matter what you do, and there's the rules are now, it's like 30 to 45 days from now, that's in theory any like coal and nuclear plants that have 30 or 90 days of storage on site can actually get a premium. The reason is because they can't compete with solar and wind anymore. So the grid scale solar is actually getting cheaper than coal, and we're just plain out competing them. And we're not there yet on the residential scale, but for solar perspective, they kind of have this brainwashed enough that we have our goal to meet at 2020, and we're trying to stay on track to do that, and we think we can. So our history, and again, I did a little bit about, from the whole grid perspective of storage. So this is what you've seen here is a PV tracker. That's what we do now. This really is our business where we just make electricity directly for your house. It's a really good financial investment if you haven't gone solar yet. So it beats what else you can do with your money. But our history was really as we started with a heliostat with a DOE. So that's where your mirror. So exact same machine, really, exact same structure. It was really our R&D was around the structure of this and proving that out and testing it with jet engines and all sorts of other things. But as a heliostat is something that tracks the sun and reflects it to a common point. And so heat, hot water, makes steam, electricity. So we were very involved with that for a while. And this is what happens when you do that. And some of you have probably seen pictures of the Bright Source system in the Mojave Desert with 3 towers. Have you seen those pictures? But what people haven't seen as many pictures, or at least I don't think they're nearly as common as a picture of this one, which I'm actually more excited about because it's a company called Solar Reserve. And this is a 110 megawatt facility, so it's about 20% the size of Vermont Yankee. And all these are mirrors thousands and thousands of mirrors that reflect onto this little white spot there, which isn't so little. That's I don't remember the height, but hundreds of feet tall. And that little white spot's probably about 60 feet tall. But what's really exciting about this system is that they have, it's a 110 megawatt power plant, but it has 10 hours of 100% storage. So in other words, in the dark at night, you can put 110 megawatts for 10 hours. So it's basically a 24-hour power plant because, power plants, in fact, actually fluctuate up and down. This is just outside Las Vegas. So if you go to Las Vegas and all those neon lights are on at 2 in the morning, and they'd be powered by this plant right here.
I wonder how many people they employ.
I don't know that number.
But I'm just...
But yeah, they employed a whole bunch making it, not so many running it. It's like a coal plant doesn't, employ very many people either. It's probably the same order scale. But this tower, this is the receiver just from there. That is white because of the heat. All these are mirrors that are reflecting the sun up there all day long. It's obviously a pretty desert area, so it gets sun almost all the time. During the day, these are 2 tanks. One's a cold tank and one's a hot tank holding molten salt. So you take the salt out of the cold tank, which is only 550 degrees Fahrenheit, and you pump it up here, and you heat it up to 1,050 degrees, and then you put it down in this tank. And then at night, when you want to make power, you just take your 1,050 degree molten salt out, you pump it through a heat exchanger, you make steam, and now you're just like a coal plant or a nuclear plant where you have steam and you run it through a generator and you make power. So this is a 24-hour solar plant. And it's really good at dealing with all those things we talked about, like frequency regulation and black start and voltage regulation, and can provide all those kinds of services to the grid. So this probably doesn't work quite so well in Vermont, New Hampshire, unfortunately. But it's a really exciting technology for half the country anyway. This is another one. This actually probably is a little bit more potential in this part of the country, but still not ideal. This is one that I'm familiar with personally, so it's pretty exciting. But they get solar hot air, and then you go considerably hotter than 1,050 degrees, more like 1,800 degrees. Where same thing, you have a whole bunch of heliostats all reflect the sun up into this kind of receiver, gets super hot in there, but just hot air. And that hot air can either run straight through a turbine. What is a natural gas? And all natural gas does is a natural gas turbine. You heat it up, you burn it, runs through a turbine, and spins a generator. It's just hot air going through there. So this is using solar to make that hot air, and then runs a turbine just like a natural gas plant does. But they also can run it down through this big stack of basically fire bricks, ceramic tiles, which can heat up wicked hot. So those can heat up to like 1,800 degrees and can store the air. And the same thing, you can store that all night, and then in the middle of the night you can run air through there the other way, heat it up, and run through the turbine. So again, 24/7 solar plant. So we're not quite as that many machines out there yet. There's a couple $2 billion of heliostats in these plants, so we're not quite to that scale yet, unfortunately. But this is our version of it. It's at one of our community solar fields in Vermont, which we have a number now, which we're pretty excited about what we're doing with that. So one other thing I mentioned, which I find really interesting, I'm not by stretch a real expert on these, but I just talked to these people at trade shows. I found it really interesting, and again, from sort of that, putting that vision out there. So over the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to see so many changes that we really are on board with just fundamentally changing our energy system. So these are what are called flow batteries. This would be enough for about 100 houses right here. That could totally support 100 houses, for 24 hours. And you think of a typical, like a car battery. battery, right, or any of these batteries we're talking about, there's one compartment that does two things. It stores the energy, and it has a reaction, electrochemical reaction that actually makes the electricity. And these things happen in the same place. That's what we're used to. What a flow battery does is it takes these things apart. So it stores things in a different place than where it reacts. So you have two parts, two things that you store on what we think of with a typical battery, the anode and the cathode. You probably remember that. Okay, so you have a tank, two different tanks, but those are totally separate. And the great thing about the flow battery, when they're totally separated, they can just sit there forever. You know, these things don't react. If they're just sitting in a tank, nothing changes for 100 years. You could come back 100 years from now, as long as your tanks didn't leak, and then you can combine these two chemical solutions and make electricity from it. So it's pretty exciting technology. So you have, and the other thing is, you know, a battery is a certain size battery, a certain amount of amp hours or whatever. With this, you can, the tank size and your reactor size, so this is where you put the liquids together and make the electricity, or vice versa. We're freezing up again. Where you go the other way, you take put electricity in and you separate the components. The reactor is separate from the storage tanks, so you can size those totally different. So you have how big a reactor you want, which is how much power do you want at any given moment, and then how many hours of storage do you want, which is a totally separate thing because you just make bigger tanks or smaller tanks.
So just touch your mouse pad, right? Just right.
Okay, that's the secret. Huh? Thanks.
Because it
So
goes
the-
to sleep.
So the advantage is these kind of flow batteries are just basically don't decay over time. So the amount of power, like the warranties on a lithium ion, 70% at year 10. These are, you get 100% at year 20, and some of these are projected to last much longer. So there's a lot of different kinds out there. Vanadium flow is a big one, but there's a lot of different chemistries, but just the whole concept of it is really exciting. These are sort of more utility scale. There was one company trying to do a smaller residential one. It hasn't worked so well so far. But I think we're going to see a lot of excitement on those over the next decade. Of course, hydro as a source of storage, you know, to bolster solar wind is definitely a major thing that we need to take advantage of. How many people have an electric car? Woo-hoo! Awesome. You know, that's going to become a really big storage mechanism, right? The typical Tesla there now is going to have basically 2 days of, you can run your house 2 days off it. You know, so if you charge it at work and bring it home, or vice versa, you can actually move your solar around. And you know, if you have enough of these cars, not everyone's going to drive your full range, your 300 miles or whatever a day. So at any given time, you're going to have, you know, days of residential storage sitting in your parking lot. So as you know, that's the thing. And again, there are not many mechanisms policy-wise to do that yet, but there will be. Believe me, it's coming fast. So this is really exciting. Same thing with your hot water tank. You know, these things, the technology, now that everything's internet enabled, the ability to control things, the amount of, you know, you take Vermont, New Hampshire, all the hot water tanks, and you just shift that an hour, you basically could affect the entire New England grid during that hour. Significantly. It's a lot of power sitting there, and a lot of energy. So the United States, about 25% of the world economy. We're only 13.3% of the world's solar. So we're less than half in terms of where we should be just on an economic basis. And so, you know, we're kind of a follower. So it doesn't matter what we do, the world's going to go ahead without us. It's almost 90% of the world is moving ahead. The technology is going to change with or without us. The question is, are we going to lead or follow? So, and again, are we going to lead or follow? So over 5 million people in China, a whole province was 100% renewable for a week. Costa Rica was 100% renewable for 299 days. Portugal, 100% renewable for 107 hours, the entire country. Germany actually had negative electricity prices in 2016, where they literally paid people to use power because they had so much solar and wind going into the grid, they needed to get rid of it. So, you know, we're really proud in Norwich, 1 in 6 houses we're nowhere close to this, right? Vermont and New Hampshire, we can think, oh yeah, we're kind of progressive, well, on the world stage, we're not. Sorry, folks. So let's get going.
Right.
All
Yeah.
right. Thanks very much.
So I'd like to invite Joanna Sharp to come on up. Joanna is leading us as a Sierra Club Ready for 100 Renewable Energy in Plainfield and Cornish. So I'd really like to hand it to Joanna for leading the way for our Cornish and Plainfield Energy Committees. We'll let her set up. While we're doing that, should we ask Kim and Bill to come up and answer any questions you might have right at this moment? Maybe this would be a good time. And Kim, if you'll just repeat the question so everybody can hear it, and then you can answer it.
Well, my question for Kim is, if utilities are going to charge us more for certain times of usage, will they also be willing to pay more for our giving them our electricity from solar during those times?
Right. We absolutely need to demand that. And in the net metering discussions this year in New Hampshire, which I sat in on a lot of them, there was that discussion. And over the next 2 years, there's supposed to be, one of the things that we're doing in all the new solar installations is putting in smart meters in New Hampshire. Now in Vermont, they've been putting them in for a long time. We have to put them in New Hampshire, and those smart meters are going to give us the information about exactly when the solar is producing, and that we can match that up with exactly when the energy demands are. And the next step after that is to make sure that we either get paid more by producing solar in the late afternoon, a little bit facing west, or trackers. So
I have a connection to that,
Yeah.
just for a moment. New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, a couple of years ago, started the peak demand incentive, that if you signed up for it, they would call you or text you and tell you that tomorrow is going to be a peak demand between 2 and 7. Don't use less power.
Use less power.
And they are giving you, they're taking it off, they're giving you, I think, $4 or $5 off your...
So yeah, New Hampshire Electric Co-op actually has some programs now that to try to help modify the usage to meet when the demand is and the solar.
They're training
Right.
us
Right.
to use it.
Trying to train us, trying to train us. And that's a part of what Bill said, is we want you all to understand so we can all be advocates for what's reasonable for our grid.
But they're paying a little bit.
Yeah, and they can be paid for that. You want to address the first one?
Yeah, and a lot of utilities nationally, utilities are kind of scared of renewables because they think video stores, right? And it's true. The grid is going to get completely changed over the next few decades, whether utilities go along with it or not. The thing is this smarter utilities, and we're fortunate in Vermont, Green Mountain Power is sort of an advocate for some of these policies, at least to some extent, at least you pretend to be. But in Vermont, 18% of our energy usage is electricity. And we're never going to have renewables powering Boston or New York City from inside Boston. There's just not enough energy, not enough renewables in the city, and even in Burlington and Rutland and Barrie or Manchester. So you're always going to need a grid because you always have density of people that you can't do all renewable. So in this kind of neighborhood where we are up here, a lot of people can sort of be potentially off grid, and they could disconnect. I think Green Mountain Power actually realized if the guy way at the end of the line that always goes down in every storm actually disconnects, hey, what's wrong with that? So that's a good thing. But in Vermont, it's 18% of our total energy is electricity, as I said, and as Kim pointed out, we have to electrify if we want to solve the climate problems we have, and even pollution problems. Even if you don't believe in climate change and you live in Salt Lake City or LA, why don't you want want cleaner air and drive an EV. I mean, it's crazy, right? What are people thinking? But if you do believe in climate change and you want to solve that problem, then we have to electrify more things. So the smart utilities need to say, hey, we're going to get on board with this. It's going to be 18% electric. We're going to be 50% electric. We're going to be 100% electric. And even if the far-flung people are totally off-grid, it doesn't matter because the cities still need us as a grid. So let's get twice as much energy going around the state, and hey, this is a good thing. So, it actually behooves the utilities to start thinking in this bigger kind of picture.
You're going to have...
Bill, I think it was in 38, a really big, well not big, because a hurricane came ashore at Long Island Express, I think, and came into Vermont, and there were hurricane force winds through a huge swath of Vermont. How do your trackers handle like 75, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour?
We're rated to 105 miles an hour.
105? Okay.
So we don't sell in Florida. The hurricane coast, and even like the first 20 miles in Connecticut, Massachusetts, we wouldn't sell. But inland of that, we're good.
Okay, for an interest of time,
Yeah.
I'd like to have Joanna introduce yourself and your actual Emily Electric.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Joanna Sharp, a member of our Cornish Energy Committee. And one of the things that I'm realizing, kind of learning as much as I can about batteries and listening to Kim and Bill, is that there are two things working together. There's the technology to store the energy, and then there's the software part, the smart part, and that can even increase the capacity of the plain storage part. And what I want to talk to... Hello.
There you
Is that better?
There you go.
I probably won't talk about all of this because some of it's been covered, but Green Mountain Power has started a program using the Tesla Powerwall batteries, and which starts to use the batteries in a very smart way. So there's three-part goal of the program to increase the amount of decentralized renewable energy resources that are available to the utility. So they want to use some of the locally generated energy in homes instead of from a power plant, to increase reliability for customers and to transform the electrical grid to one that's closer to homes, businesses, and communities. So some of this has already been said, but the last bullet point here is important. Green Mountain Power will partner with customers to utilize the batteries during peak energy times to directly lower costs for customers by reducing transmission and capacity costs. So Green Mountain Power, the program that they are starting, a lot of this has already been covered. So there's your Powerwall 2, is that Green Mountain Power is offering customers to have the Powerwall installed in their homes, but Green Mountain Power owns the battery so that it has the right, or there's an agreement made, that it has the right to use it at certain peak times. And I think it's a very smart concept. They started in late 2015, and they've installed only 20 Powerwall 1s, and they had a few problems with the SolarEdge inverter that was paired with the battery, and that delayed their progress, and then the Powerwall 2 became available. And the installation of Powerwall 2s will start very soon, and they want to install about 2,000 of those batteries over the next year in residences. And then after the first 2,000, they'll kind of reevaluate how things are going. So GMP will own the Powerwall, and it's an incredibly good deal for the customers. They only will charge the customer to have the Powerwall installed in their home $1,500, and you can pay it at $15 a month for 10 years or in one upfront sum. If you were to purchase the Powerwall privately, if you can get a hold of one, they're not readily available at this point, it would cost you $6,200 for the battery and probably about $2,000 in installation costs. So the benefits that this program gives to Green Mountain Power's customers is resiliency is the biggest one. So it provides the backup power. And you don't have to have solar, as it has been explained. It will provide backup power during power outages. And the second bullet point, with only the 20 Powerwalls that are now installed in individual homes, Green Mountain Power has successfully reduced monthly peak demand on several occasions. Typically, a peak event is what they call it. It lasts about 2 to 3 hours, and for each one, they have saved about 75 kilowatts, which is one inverter's capacity times the 20 inverters. So at the end of their Powerwall, the plan is the Powerwalls are guaranteed for 10 years, but with some degradation expectations. And GMP, at the end of their life, they'll remove them and send them back to Tesla for recycling, and then they'll see what else is on the market at that point for this kind of thing. So what I think, this is like a very smart concept, very smart program, because what they're doing is they're making little individual power plants and using decentralized power generations from solar if possible, or renewables if possible, but sometimes it's just the grid feeding those and being stored in a home battery. And so instead of building a new power plant to meet peak demand whenever it comes about, here you have all these decentralized little power plants around. And the Sonnen Battery, and as Kim explained, the Sonnen Battery already has a proven track record, whereas the Tesla is just coming on the market and only has, it doesn't even have a year of the Powerwall 2's experience. But the Sonnen Battery they've sold 16,000, mostly in Europe, worldwide. And it's an existing product that has, since 2011, been around, so a few years experience. And what Sonnen is doing is something very interesting. The intelligent part of their battery is doing, a lot more to use this concept beyond the battery, between homes that have batteries, and it's called Sonnen Community. And Sonnen Community is capable of connecting virtually and intelligently an entire community of individual homes with Sonnen batteries. Even a home without any battery or solar can participate. Thousands of homes in Germany are already connected in a Sonnen Community. So there's lower cost, renewably and locally produced energy. Participants buy and sell energy to each other, independent of the utility. In Europe, as I understand it, this is allowed. I mean, the best example of being able to do that here is what GMP is doing in Vermont. And then if there is any community-wide surplus unused, that's sold back to the European grid or German grid to make some money and reduce the community's costs of electricity. And Sonnen is now starting to sell their batteries in the US, and they're trying to promote the idea of building housing developments that already have this kind of Sonnen community using the batteries in their homes. Okay, I just want to talk, Tesla, so their residential program is just coming off the ground, but they already have utility scale batteries, their Tesla Power Pack, and this is a solar installation, and these white structures there are their Power Pack grid scale battery storage that look like this. This is a substation in California. So these are already installed and Tesla has them working. And then in Hawaii, this is another solar with the storage batteries, the power packs there. So I'm going to go from, I want to talk to you about some very small batteries, portable batteries that are useful just for 1 to 2 hours of power. They're good for, construction sites. Instead of having to drag a generator out there and gasoline, you can use it to charge your battery tools or to a plug-in power tool. They're good for short power outages in residences. These are little batteries that are on wheels with an expandable handle, and you can just wheel them into your home and plug your stuff in, and they're good for camping trips. And there are 3 types that I'm going to show you. These are still very expensive, but I just wanted to give people an idea of what's out there. So there's the Kohler N-Cube. The company that makes generators decided to do this also. So this is what that looks like. And you can pair it with a solar panel and recharge it. It takes a long time with the solar panel, but it's a start. It's 1,800 watts. It costs about $1,000. It's not cheap. And it's a slow charging thing. So if you plug it into your house outlet, an AC outlet, 120 volt, it'll take you 12 hours to recharge the whole thing. With a 60 watt solar panel that they sell you for it, it could take you up to more than 24 hours to recharge it. You have to do it when the sun is shining, of course. So these are not perfect and they're not affordable, but it's a possible option, maybe. You can combine 2 or more panels, you can get quicker charging than 24 hours of charging. And then there's Xantrix. They have this power pack. This is the cheapest one. It's a 1,500 watt battery, and it costs about $500. And it is possible to charge it with a solar panel, but they don't sell one. And you have to find one and find a way of not controlling the charging, so it's a little difficult, but you can recharge it by plugging it into your house. And then this is a very cute thing. And I think you can get this on Home Depot online, their online store. So these are various examples of the...
My grandmother used to iron sheets. Really cute.
So, and it costs $1,000 to $1,200, and there's a Plus model that costs about $1,400. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. And from the very small to the very large, I'm jumping around here. Bill has talked about pumped hydro. These are like huge scale types batteries, and the molten salt. There's also an ice battery where there's a building in New York City where you chill and freeze some fluid in pipes and during the day, and at night at night, and then during the day, you're using grid electricity to chill it, and then during the day it air conditions the whole building. The thing that I am very interested in, this is a little animated thing showing the pumped hydro. The thing about pumped hydro is you need a huge amount of space and huge amounts of water, and it's not environmentally, it is environmentally disruptive to the aqua.
It sounds great, Joanne.
There are about 40 pumped hydro stations in the U.S. now, so they are working. They only provide, this is in Spain, so you can see the huge scale required. And not everywhere do you have these 2 huge ponds or lakes at different elevations. And it is disruptive to, wildlife and aqualife and
Is it like tidal? How does tidal pump it? Tidal.
Tidal is, I think, electricity generating technology, not a storage, as far as I understand, but Bill and Kim might be able to correct me. But there is a more improved pumped hydro that uses an ocean kind of lagoon and uses the salt water. It kind of pumps the salt water out and lets it trickle back when it's needed, and then it spins a turbine like that. So it does use the ocean in that way, and that's a little less environmentally disruptive.
Conceptually, that could be done on a small scale. It would be less disruptive.
So like small.
Where you had a small pond at the top of your
Yep.
hill, you pump water up, you let it flow
Yep.
down through a small generator and generate electricity for you at night while your solar panels pump the water up in the daytime.
Yep.
It's a surprisingly large amount of water.
Really?
It does. In big ponds.
Here goes
If
about
you do
45%.
math on it, it depends a lot on the
Okay.
head. Unless you have several hundred
Okay.
feet, there's a lot of water.
But there's this company in California called Advanced Rail Energy Storage, or ARES, and they wanted to find a way to store energy that could mimic pumped hydro but without the water and the resulting environmental problems. And their solution is to use renewable energy, wind or solar, to drive a heavily loaded train up a hill and then let gravity do the rest. And as the train rolls back down the hill, it generates electricity from the turning wheel, similar to the regenerative braking in electric vehicles like the Prius.
So it's a net gain? If you use renewable, you get it up.
Yeah.
You use any, right, okay.
So they did a kind of a prototype thing, and then they won approval from the Bureau of Land Management for its first commercial scale project, which is going to be in Pahrump, Nevada. It's a 50 megawatt installation equivalent to a 1 gigawatt dam powering more than 500,000 homes. I don't have information on, how long it can power each of those 500,000 homes, but that's what it claims. It would have 8 miles of tracks. There would be several parallel tracks, 2 storage yards at different elevations, and 144 car shuttle units. And once it starts rolling back down the hill, and this is important for grid scale energy, it's actually a little better in some of their tests. They can come up to full power at 10 seconds, which is kind of slow because the grid wants to come on to full power right away, but it's pretty good, I think.
We could each have a railroad car in our backyard.
Yes, we could. I mean, it would be good for our hilly country.
Yeah.
So this is a little
Hilarious.
graphic. This is one of their prototype rail cars, heavily weighted down. And then some of the good parts, things about it is that there's no standby energy storage losses. The train can sit at the top of the hill and it'll still roll down the same amount and produce the same amount of energy.
It's called Sisyphus.
And that's why I like the flow batteries. And it has a lifespan of 40 plus years, and it has a light environmental impact. So it's just rails on top of soil, and that can be easily removed at the end of life. And this is an artist's rendering. So these rail cars look very different. It was on their website, so I assume that's what the commercial grade rail cars will look like. And that's what the tracks will look like in the storage yards. How are we doing? That's the end of my talk, and I just want to let you know about upcoming events. Plainfield and Cornish are working toward getting our towns to commit to going 100% renewable by the year 2050, and we're going to have a launch that will explain all the information about that and what that would involve. So it's going to be a vote at town meeting, but our launch very informational presentation will be on Tuesday, November 14th at 7 p.m. in the Plainfield Town Hall.
On 12A.
On 12A. And we have also been selected by Vital Communities for their Weatherize program. So that's going to be launched in January. So if you are a Plainfield or Cornish resident, it will provide a very advantageous cost, and we will be a supportive team to help you get your house buttoned up. And then there's the March town meeting where this proposal will be voted on.
What does it mean January? What does that mean when you say January?
That's when the weatherized program will begin.
We will have a weatherized launch, which will present the information and invite everybody to come to learn about how to participate. And you will meet the contractors who will be...
Presumably those of us who aren't here in January could pick it up again in May.
No, the thing about the weatherized program is that it will be introduced in January to the towns. Then you will get contractors to come give you an estimate in February, March, and April, and you need to sign a contract to benefit from the financial offers in this program. You have to sign a contract by May.
But if there's possibility of remote and, PDFs, so don't...
So the mailing list we signed when we came in, is that the same for Weatherize, or is it a separate mailing list?
No, it'll be the same.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to show you, these are my batteries in my house. So they're the lead acid batteries. I don't know if you can see it. I had to build a little battery container for it, and that piece of PVC pipe vents the excess fumes. When the batteries charge, they exhaust some gas. So that gets pulled out, and that's a little DC fan, exhaust fan that sends it outside. And so this is sort of like the hardware, and then my inverter has the smarts to do a lot of the things that the Tesla and the Sonnen can do, but not everything.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. So how do you use these?
These are connected to my inverter. My inverter's on the left side of this room.
If the
So
grid,
it's like the Tesla wall, it's a simplified version of the...
Yeah, it's sort of compartmentalized. So inside the Tesla Powerwall, it has the battery part and it has the inverter part all in the one box.
Yeah.
But here it's separate.
Gotcha.
If you have a type of rooftop solar where each panel has its own inverter, can you still use the Tesla? Will it provide some way of converting that AC coming off your roof back to DC to charge the battery?
Maybe, Kim, can you answer that?
What it does is the Tesla can do your backup, and then if you want it to talk to the solar to talk to you, if you've got it wired properly, then it will put a nice grid voltage for the N-phase inverters or the inverters, the microinverters. To see it, they will turn on, and then if there's too much current flowing into those batteries and they're full, then it will actually change that frequency or voltage to get those inverters to turn off. I think Tesla, Sonnen batteries, most of these standalone battery systems work that way, and as long as the grid tie inverter, or in your case the microinverters, are willing to work that way, which I think they have to. Is that your understanding?
But you have to rectify that AC.
No, so the AC actually goes directly into a backup loads panel, which wants AC, 240 volts AC, and the Tesla battery over here is also going directly into that same panel, AC. So it's coupled through the AC. It's called an AC coupled system. So if there's extra solar coming off the solar panels and that microinverter, they go back to the Tesla, which charges its battery.
Is this the Tesla 2 as opposed to
Tesla 2 or the Sonnen battery?
Okay, because the Tesla 1 did not do this.
Tesla 1 doesn't do that.
The presentation some months ago in Woodstock.
Yeah.
And that was the problem. I do have solar panels with the...
A Tesla, you have solar panels and microinverters and a Tesla Powerball 1.
I don't.
You don't have the Powerball 1 because it wasn't going to work with your system.
Wasn't gonna work for
Right, the
that.
Powerball 1. It has to be a Sonnen Battery or a Tesla Powerwall 2. One of these that's, what did I call it? A combination battery inverter system.
Okay, so the new Tesla or the other battery would work with an existing...
The new Powerwall 2 Tesla, the Sonnen Battery, and no, I don't think the LG did. But you can combine, kind of the way your system is, you can combine batteries and one of these inverters that knows how to do an AC coupling, it's called. So there's lots of ways to make up the system in separate parts. And that's what we've been doing for many years.
Right.
But now, these new products, the Sonnen Battery and the Tesla Powerwall 2, are trying to combine things to make it simpler.
Right.
And put the smarts in.
Right, and also the Green Mountain Power is incentivizing, and the principal incentive, if I heard you correctly, is to provide backup power.
So Green Mountain Power's principal incentive for you, the homeowner, is that you'll have backup power if you buy into this Tesla Powerwall 2 situation. The principal incentive for them is they can use that battery for their peak. So it's a good combination of working with your utility and the grid.
But you could also use that to do peak and off-peak hours and all that stuff.
Probably, but I don't. I think GMP owns that aspect of that power wall. If you own it yourself, you have control over the smarts. I think if Green Mountain Power owns it, it has control over the computer side. Because it needs to know what's going on there. What was your question?
Are any of the New Hampshire utilities looking at that?
I think NHEC is the only one.
Actually, yeah, New Hampshire Electric Co-op is sort of the most progressive of the New Hampshire ones.
Yeah.
On the other hand, New Hampshire Electric Co-op, just so are there other New Hampshire Electric Co-op people? Oh boy. So the good and the bad, hopefully they will keep trying to be like GMP. The difficulty is they had their net metering rules changed 2 years ago. And when they changed their net metering rules, they still charge you for everything you use every night, every time the solar is not providing, the sun's not shining. Which means they look every 10 minutes at how much you use. So they charge you for everything you use. At the end of a month, they'll pay you if there's still any net exported to them. So, and it's 3.5 cents less than retail. The only reason I say that is because they charge you, your import fees are based on a 10-minute period, and your export, if you export more to the grid, is based on a monthly period. It would be great to add batteries to that system because every day you would want to save as much solar as you can and use it that night so you're not importing any.
Okay, Joanna, that's...
Okay, go for it.
But that's specific cases, so you can talk about those separately. Other questions?
So is that Green Mountain Power deal, is that a no-brainer?
I think so.
I mean, it costs you how much more a month? $15 a month?
Yeah.
So if you don't care about battery backup, if you already have a generator and you don't care about using the fuel when the grid goes down, if the grid doesn't go down very much, well, that's $15. Then if the grid doesn't go down very much, then it's hard to justify any more money a month, probably. But if you were going to use it instead of a fossil fuel generator, a lot of people would say that's a great deal.
So if the grid goes down during the peak time, I mean, do they get it, you don't?
So what they do in the agreement, no, as part of the agreement, no, because Green Mountain Power has, it's an important agreement. If there's a storm in the area, then they're supposed to prioritize a full battery for you in case your power goes out. But, if a guy down the street runs into the pole and your power goes out at 2 in the afternoon, your battery might be empty. Because they might have used it. But so it's probably in the fine print. Have you seen the contract? I'm pretty sure it's in the fine print. You get priority if we know there's a storm coming, but otherwise, what can we do?
Well, do you have Green Mountain Power in Cornish?
No.
Just Vermont. Bill's our expert in Green Mountain Power, although I don't know if you have one of these batteries. No. No, there's not too, there's only 20 people who have one of these batteries so far, so.
Is it still true that you're not allowed to put in the Tesla batteries in New Hampshire? That was a problem,
think so.
wasn't it?
I know
Or is
that-
that a myth?
Yeah, no, it's not, it's just that you can't get them.
That's the problem.
So right now, GMP has a deal with Tesla, and they can get some of the new Powerwall 2s when they're available, like soon, we think.
Yeah.
They'll start getting them. The rest of us peons can't. And it's kind of like the Tesla Model 3. Get in line, and in about a year, you might get one. And it'll be the same way. But when they come out, there'll be, lots of people will get them. And it won't have a problem what state you're in. They like to install, they like to install everything themselves. That's the other problem, is if they'd, spread some of that installation out, they'd probably get more installed.
So my situation is such that I have a tracker system, but I run about maybe 2,000 kilowatts a year short of having enough kilowatt hours.
Close. 2,000.
And that's close.
Yeah.
I've got 2 teenage girls, and
They're going to go to school at some point,
they're
maybe.
difficult.
Yeah, in the house, and then you'll have that 2,000 kilowatt hours back.
But so rather than buy that energy back in the winter, if I had one of those batteries as a backup, I wouldn't have to be pumping it. I could not use grid energy at night. I could use battery energy.
Yes, and you could get your 2,000
put more into
kilowatt
the
hours.
grid during the day.
Yep.
And I don't have to change out my panels and put in.
Well, okay, so, but if you're using, let me just ask this question, and maybe Bill, if you're using all the energy that you're making with your tracker, then putting some of it into batteries and using it later isn't going to get you more. Right? So if it was the other way around, if it was the other way around and you had extra at the end of the year, and you wanted to use it when you wanted to use it, then maybe putting it in batteries makes sense. So you're not going to get more. Batteries aren't magic.
Do you have batteries now?
No.
No.
Oh, so
Just got at the end of the year, 12 months, he's used
it all.
a little less than all. He still pays for 2,000 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
But once the kids go.
Yeah, just wait for the kids to go, in your case. Okay, shut another light off every night.
I think it's time to say goodnight.
Yes.
But I want to thank you all for coming.
Yes, and thank you, Kim and Bill, very